Hello there, I'm John Patrick for the Atlanta Regional Commission. Welcome. I'm with Chris Chovan, who is a transportation planner with the Atlanta Regional Commission. Hi, Chris.
Hi, John.
We're going to talk about the Buford Highway Multi-Modal Corridor Study. What does multimodal mean?
In a short answer, it's basically looking at all modes of transportation. It's going to look at pedestrians, bicycles, the car, trucks, buses, rail, anything and everything whenever you're addressing congestion or mobility in a certain corridor.
And the word corridor is important too because it's more than just the roadway.
That's exactly right. We're also, besides looking at the corridor, we're going approximately a half a mile on either side of the corridor, looking at land use patterns, looking at development patterns that are going up and down the corridor, and also taking in some of the major intersections that are in this area.
Now, it's 18.4 miles of road.
That's
covering, what, 3 counties, something like that?
That's correct, 3 counties.
Doesn't that present some difficulties in just coordinating in a study like this?
Oh, it is. Whenever you get this many local governments to the table, each of them has a certain idea about how they want to develop or what transportation investments they want to make. So not only are we dealing with the counties, but we're also dealing with the cities. I think there's some 8 cities that are represented in the corridor. So we have to address each one of their issues as well, not just the unincorporated parts of the counties.
We talk about growth a lot at the Atlanta Regional Commission and what it'll look like in 2030 around the Buford corridor. What's it like now and how's it going to grow?
Well, in this particular area, you pretty much have a study of 3 corridors, really. I mean, if you want to look at Buford Highway in such a manner. You know, kind of south of the 285 area, we have a large ethnic population moving into the area. Latino, Hispanic, Asian are moving into the Chamblee and Dorville areas. When you get north of 285, it starts to transition into more, levels of suburban type developments, and you're getting a little bit lower density residential and commercial development until you move up towards the Duluth area, which is the northern terminus of our corridor study, where it's typical suburban development, where you're getting people moving into the area, but it's typically single-family homes, it's large lots and that type of thing. So you're really seeing a kind of a transitional corridor as you move from south to north in way of density, in way of populations that are kind of making up the communities.
You may have answered it, but how does this diversity, what kind of challenges does it present?
I think the biggest challenge that we've got right now is making sure that we get the right people to the table to make, informed decisions and learn about why we're there and what we expect them to do in way of making the decisions in our investment in our land use. For example, in the Chamblee and Dorville areas, we have, again, a large population that may not speak English. And so we're having to make sure to publish our materials in multiple languages, primarily Spanish and Mandarin Chinese, so that we can make sure to invest or engage these people and get them to the table to talk with us about what their needs are in that corridor.
Buford Highway most of the time doesn't have a huge amount of traffic on it, but when something happens on I-85, everybody heads for Buford Highway to get out of town. Does that present challenges? Are you concerned about that in this study as well?
It has to be. You have to look at that. The road, as we all know, functions as an alternate to I-85. So if there is some type of catastrophic breakdown on I-85, people are going to, water flows downhill, so to speak. So people are going to find the easiest way that they can get into or out of the city, and that just happens to be Buford Highway because of the parallel nature of the roadway. One of the things that this study will look at is operational improvements. I don't know necessarily during a catastrophic issue like on 85, but it will look at operational. It'll look at signal timing. It'll look at intersection improvements where we may need to have additional turn lanes, to let the through traffic get through. It may be a better, more transit coverage in that corridor, more buses or even an upgrade to rail, so that people have an alternative or an option so they can get up and down and not have to, again, worry about a car or getting stuck in lengthy traffic.
In a perfect world, what would you like this study to accomplish?
I think 2 things. I think the first thing that I would like for it to do is to develop the corridor from a land use perspective and a redevelopment perspective to give Buford Highway a sense of identity. Right now, it's got a little bit of identity in certain places. Again, we go back to the Chamblee and Dorville with the ethnic populations. You have restaurants, you have shops, you have signage that's all built in their native languages. English is kind of a secondary language in there. So that's really the first thing, I think, is just making sure that we can get Buford a sense of identity, give it a name, so to speak. The other thing is to address the transportation issues, because that's really what we're trying to do here, is to focus on mobility and congestion. As you said earlier, Buford Highway doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of problems. It may have some intersection problems here and there. So let's focus in on those. Let's solve those. And then take it one step further and look at future investment. Again, is rail a good investment? Should we run a light rail line up the corridor?
I think there's a rail
buses.
already there.
Exactly. I mean, should we connect onto that? Should we connect onto the MARTA system that's already there? The Gwinnett Transit system is already running buses down Buford Highway that connect with the Doraville MARTA station. So again, we want to look at everything. And of course, the big thing along Buford Highway in certain sections is pedestrian and bicycle safety. And that's another thing. We need to look at crosswalks, and we need to look at timing. Can people get across the street? I mean, that's a big issue, especially in areas that don't have, you know, where there's populations where there's not a vehicle in use.
Except for maybe Duluth and Norcross, you don't see a lot of parks in that area.
Not really, because it's highly developed. It was one of the first and second level suburbs that were developed in Atlanta during the 70s and 80s. And so it's already seen its development, and now that's moved on, you know, to another area, and you're getting these populations moving back into these areas and taking hold of the community and really kind of expressing you know, their sense of place and what they want to see in their communities. There are parks there, but not necessarily right up on the corridor, because again, that all developed out so quickly. Let's
talk about the bigger picture for a moment. You mentioned the study involved a half a mile on either side of Buford Highway. But how does this study figure into the bigger picture of transportation around that area?
That's a good question. I think any corridor study that we do, if it's on Buford Highway or any other major facility that we've got, even a freeway, for example, from a regional perspective at ARC, we have to look at how does this tie into everything else that we're doing. For example, the Buford Highway corridor southern terminus is just east of the Lindbergh MARTA station. So we've got to figure out, if we're going to do a transit investment, buses, a rail upgrade, whatever, how does that tie back into Lindbergh? As you know, Lindbergh is kind of a live, work, play community that's really, it's not technically part of our corridor, but it literally bumps up against it. And so we've got to look to see how that ties in. We have, you know, the 285 crossing right north of Doraville. We have major freight movement up and down the corridor. So we've got to look at everything and see how regionally, how this Buford Highway corridor will act with the rest. And again, it's done that way pretty much anywhere across the region when it comes to any corridor.
You know, I think people want to know how this study might affect them on a day-to-day basis. So can you elaborate on that at all?
Sure. Again, I think going back to several things that we've already talked about, options. I think options is the big thing that personally I would like to see out of it. You know, right now you do have MARTA in certain segments, or you have Gwinnett buses running in certain segments. But I'd like to see a little bit more. Give the commuter an option. If they're not a commuter, if they don't have a vehicle, if they're looking to get to the grocery store, then give them a nice wide sidewalk, or give them a bike lane so that they can get to the store or get to the daycare or whatever it is that they need to get to. We don't want to ignore the road. You know, maybe there's some intersection improvements that need to be made. Signal timing maybe needs to be upgraded. Grade separations. I mean, anything and everything is on the table in this early parts of the process whenever you're going out for the first time and really kind of getting a handle on what's going on in the corridor.
You know, people are always afraid of change. That just happens. What can you tell them to maybe give them some confidence about what this study is learning?
Well, there's going to be so much public input throughout this process. It's an approximately 18-month study. We have public meetings scheduled at least 3 times throughout the quarter study's life. We have outreach to the local government officials, so they're not left out of the process, the decision-making process. Almost getting their buy-in as early as possible and maintaining that buy-in so that when we do come up with final recommendations, it just won't be sat on the shelf and gathering dust.
It's really important to get that kind of input, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, ARC does not work in a bubble. We do not do the work in a bubble. We have to go out and talk with the community. I talked earlier about, you know, Buford Highway getting an identity. I don't know what that identity is. We need to get out to the community and ask them what that identity is so that we can incorporate that into our study.
And you sort of touched on this, but how can people find out more about it? Because I'm sure they'll want to know.
That's true. That's true. There's several different ways. We talked about the public meetings and the stakeholders and the outreach that we're doing when we come out into the communities, but they can also contact us directly at the Atlanta Regional Commission, contact staff, or write us, or they can also visit our website at atlantaregional.com.
Thank you, Chris, for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
For more information, as Chris just said, visit the Atlanta Regional Commission's website at www.atlantaregional.com.